We were a small crew, just 5 of us, packed into a ship built for cutting-edge experiments, the kind they only whispered about back home. The mission? We were supposed to test something impossible. A time portal. A device they swore could bend time itself. We had no idea what that really meant. Not until we found ourselves trapped in this endless loop. A paradox that twists reality so subtly you barely notice it happening. But when you do, it's already too late. The first time it happened, none of us even realized. We ran the test, the ship hummed, and the portal activated just like the text said it would. We were supposed to open a small rift, just a fraction of a second, but something felt off immediately. The light from the control panel flickered, just for a moment, barely noticeable. It wasn't the light, though, that got me. It was the feeling, like the air had shifted, like everything had shifted. We completed the test, or so we thought. Everything seemed normal at first. Systems were green across the board. Davis, the mission commander, was already talking about heading back to report our success. But then, 5 minutes later, the alarm blared. The exact same alarm we had heard when we started the test. Davis froze mid-sentence, staring at the console like he couldn't quite process it. None of us could. We reset the system, thinking it was a glitch, but then we ran the test again to see, and it happened again. The same exact way. The flicker of the light, the strange shift in the air, and the same alarm blaring 5 minutes later. It wasn't until the third time that we realized something was horribly wrong. It was Klein, our navigator, who first noticed. "I've seen this before," he said, his voice lower than usual. "This exact moment. I swear we've done this already." At first we brushed it off. Fatigue, maybe, or just nerves. But then the déjà vu hit me, too. The way Davis turned his head, the way the light dimmed for a second, that eerie, silent pause before the alarm. It was all the same. Exactly the same. By the 4th time it happened, none of us could deny it anymore. We were stuck. No matter what we did, the ship would run the test, and 5 minutes later everything would reset. The same conversation, the same actions, even the same thoughts. It was like being trapped inside a nightmare that kept rewinding itself. We started trying everything we could think of to break the loop. Davis ordered us to disable the portal, but the moment we touched the controls, it felt like we weren't even in control of our own hands. The commands didn't stick. It's hard to explain, but it was as if the ship itself was working against us. No matter how hard we tried, the test would run, and the cycle would repeat. We began keeping track, counting each loop. I think we were on the 6th or 7th repeat when the strangest thing happened. Klein, who had been pacing by the viewport, stopped cold and stared outside. "There's something out there," he whispered. His voice was hollow, distant, like he didn't even believe his own words. I walked over to him, thinking it was just his mind playing tricks. But when I looked out, I saw it too. A shadow, just barely visible, hanging in the void. It didn't move, didn't shift. It just was. A shape so still, so alien, I couldn't tell if it was real or just a trick of the eye, but something about it was wrong. Davis snapped us out of it, barking orders to focus. "We'll figure this out," he said, his voice steady, but there was an edge to it, a crack I hadn't heard before. We all felt it, the creeping dread that maybe we wouldn't figure this out. Maybe we were already too far gone. The next few loops passed in a blur. I lost count somewhere around 15. The conversations repeated themselves like broken records. Every time I tried to change something, say something different, move a little quicker, but it didn't matter. The loop always found a way to snap us back into place, like invisible strings pulling us along. And then, Something did change. It was during the 20th loop, or maybe the 21st. I don't know anymore. We had just run the test again, expecting the same alarm, the same 5-minute countdown. But instead, everything went silent. No alarm, no flicker, nothing. For the first time in what felt like days, there was this awful, suffocating silence. And then the light in the cockpit flickered. Not like before, not a glitch or a pulse. This was deliberate, like something was controlling it. We all stared at the light, as if waiting for it to do something. And then it went out. For a few seconds, we were plunged into darkness, just long enough for the panic to start rising in my chest. But when the light came back on, I noticed it immediately. Klein wasn't at the viewport anymore. He was standing behind me, close enough that I could hear his breathing. But I never saw him move. I hadn't even heard him. It was like he had just appeared. I turned to say something, but the words froze in my throat. His face was pale, his eyes wide and hollow, like he was staring at something none of us could see. "We're not alone," he whispered. "It's watching us." And that's when I knew. Whatever we had done, whatever mistake we had made by opening that portal, we had let something in. Something that didn't belong in our world. Or maybe we didn't belong in its world. Either way, it was here now. And it wasn't going to let us go. The silence stretched on after Klein's whisper, each second feeling like hours. We all stood there, frozen, as if speaking would make whatever was out there real. Davis was the first to break it, trying to regain control. "What do you mean? It's watching us!" His voice was sharp, almost angry, but I could hear the tremor underneath. He was just as scared as the rest of us. Klein didn't answer at first. He kept staring straight ahead, like he was listening for something none of us could hear. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely audible. "It's in the ship. Or it's been here the whole time. Waiting." The words hung in the air, and I felt this cold knot form in my stomach. I wanted to laugh it off, call him crazy, but I couldn't. Deep down, I knew he was right. We had all felt it, the presence, the wrongness. But it was easier to pretend it was just our minds playing tricks, easier to focus on the looping time, the glitch in the system. But now, there was something else, something worse. Davis took a deep breath, his face hardening. "We need to stay focused. Whatever this is, we're going to figure it out. We've been through worse. We'll get through this too." But as soon as he said it, I could tell none of us believed him. There was something about the way the ship felt now, like the walls were closing in. It was subtle at first, just a tightness in the air, but the more I tried to ignore it, the more it pressed in on me. It wasn't just the loop we were trapped in anymore. It was something else, something far older and far more dangerous. We went back to the controls, trying to act like we could fix this, like we could somehow break the cycle if we just kept working. But the more we tried, the worse it got. Every time we reset, the loop shortened. What had been a 5-minute countdown shrank to 3, then 2, until it felt like we were barely catching our breath before it all started again. And the shadow outside? It was closer now. I didn't even want to look at it anymore. But every now and then, my eyes would drift to the viewport, and it would be there, looming, larger, as if it were inching its way toward us. No one talked about it, maybe because we didn't know what to say, or maybe because acknowledging it would make it real. I started to lose track of time. I don't know how many loops we went through. They all blurred together, one endless repetition of the same moments, the same fear. But every time something small would change, a word, a movement, a glance, and with each loop, Klein seemed to slip further away. He stopped talking to us after a while. He would just stand there, staring into space, like he wasn't even aware of the rest of us anymore. I don't know if he was hearing things or seeing things that we couldn't, but whatever it was pulling him away from us, bit by bit. And then, one loop, he just wasn't there. I noticed it first when the test ended and we started to reset. His station was empty. No one had seen him leave, and the ship's sensors didn't show any movement. It was like he had vanished into thin air. We searched the ship, every room, every corridor, calling his name. But there was nothing. No sign of him. Not even a trace. That's when the fear really set in. Because if Klein could just disappear like that, without warning, without any explanation, then what about the rest of us? What if whatever was out there, whatever had slipped through that portal, was picking us off one by one? The ship felt different after that. Every sound, every creak in the hull sent a jolt of fear through me. I kept expecting to turn a corner and find something waiting. I didn't know what, and I didn't want to know. Davis tried to keep us focused, keep us moving, but I could see it in his eyes too, the realization that we were losing control. That maybe we never had control to begin with. It was Hammond, the engineer, who finally snapped. He'd always been the most level-headed of the group, the one who could keep his cool under pressure. But after Klein vanished, something in him broke. He became obsessed with the controls, working furiously to shut the portal down. He wouldn't sleep, wouldn't eat. He just kept muttering about stopping the loop, about shutting it down before it was too late. One loop I found him in the engine room, his hands shaking as he pulled at the wiring. "We have to stop it," he kept saying over and over. "We have to stop it before it gets to us." But I knew, deep down, it was already too late. Whatever was watching us, whatever was waiting, it was already inside. The loops continued, each one shorter, each one more disorienting. I started to forget what was real and what wasn't. Was this the first time I had run down this corridor, or the 50th? Had I had this conversation with Davis before, or was I imagining it? Reality blurred, like we were caught in the space between moments, unable to move forward or back. And all the while, the shadow loomed closer. I could feel it now, pressing against the ship, against my mind. It wasn't just outside anymore, it was inside. I could hear it in the walls, in the air, a faint whisper just on the edge of hearing. Not words exactly, just a presence, an awareness. Hammond's muttering grew louder, more frantic. He was tearing apart the ship piece by piece, desperate to find a way out. But there was no way out. We were trapped, caught in a loop that had no beginning and no end. And then, one loop, Davis was gone too, just like Klein. No warning, no trace. One moment he was there, barking orders, trying to keep us together. The next, his station was empty. I didn't even bother searching the ship this time. I knew he was gone, taken just like the others. And I knew deep down that I was next. The shadow outside was no longer a shadow. It was a shape now, almost visible, almost real. I could feel it, even when I wasn't looking. It was inside me, inside all of us, twisting time, twisting reality. We were no longer in control. By the time Davis vanished, I wasn't sure how many loops we'd been through. The numbers had lost all meaning. Every time the test ended, the ship felt smaller, darker, like the walls were pressing in closer. The air seemed heavier, almost suffocating, and the shadow, whatever it was no longer just outside. It felt like it was everywhere, a presence that you couldn't shake, even when you closed your eyes. I wanted to believe that it was still just me and Hammond left, but deep down I knew that wasn't true. Hammond had been slipping just like Klein. His muttering had turned into full-blown conversations with someone, or something, that wasn't there. He spent more and more time in the dark corners of the ship, refusing to respond when I called out to him. I tried to talk to him, tried to snap him out of it, but he just looked at me with this distant expression like he didn't even recognize me anymore. He wasn't Hammond anymore. He was something else. One of the loops started differently. Instead of the usual routine, Hammond wasn't at his station when the alarm went off. The control panel blinked its usual warnings, but there was no sign of him. I checked the usual places, but I knew where he'd be, down in the maintenance bay, where he'd been hiding out for the last few cycles, whispering to the shadows. When I found him, he was crouched in the dark, staring at a mess of wires and panels he'd ripped out from the ship's core systems. His hands were shaking, covered in grease and grime, but his eyes, those were the worst part. They were wide, unblinking, and they saw something that I couldn't. "Hammond," I said quietly, stepping toward him. "We have to stop. We need to get out of this." But he didn't even look at me. He was focused on something else, something only he could see. His voice was a raspy whisper, barely audible. "It's not the ship," he said. "It's us. It's inside us. It always was." My blood ran cold. I'd felt it too. The presence, the wrongness, but hearing him say it out loud made it all too real. I wanted to scream at him, to shake him, to do something, anything, to pull him out of whatever trance he was in, but it was too late for that. Hammond was gone, just like the others. The light above us flickered again just for a moment. Not the usual pulse, not the same malfunction. This time it felt intentional, like something was testing us, watching us through the darkness, waiting for us to break. I turned to leave, but Hammond's hand shot out, grabbing my wrist with surprising force. His eyes were locked on mine, and in that moment I could feel the weight of something staring back at me through him. "We were never supposed to leave," he muttered. "This place, it doesn't let go." I yanked my arm free and backed away, my heart racing. I didn't know what he meant, and I didn't want to know. All I knew was that I needed to get out. I needed to find a way to stop the loop, to break free before whatever was inside Hammond got to me too. But when I returned to the cockpit, the ship was different. The walls looked the same, the controls blinked the same, but something had changed. It was subtle, but I could feel it. The same way you can feel when someone's standing behind you, watching. It wasn't just a feeling anymore. It was real, tangible. I checked the systems, trying to focus, trying to keep myself grounded. But then I saw it, an anomaly on the sensors. Something I hadn't noticed before, maybe because it hadn't been there until now. A faint reading just outside the ship, hovering in the same spot as the shadow I'd seen earlier. I stared at the display, trying to make sense of it. Was it a glitch? A malfunction? Or was it something more? I couldn't tell anymore. My mind was unraveling, just like the ship, just like Hammond. But I had to know. I had to see it for myself. I made my way to the viewport, half expecting the shadow to be there, watching. But when I looked outside, there was nothing, just the endless black void of space, stretching on forever. No stars, no light, just darkness. But then in the corner of my eye, I saw it. A flicker. A movement. I whipped my head around, but it was already gone. My heart pounded in my chest as I stared into the darkness, straining to see whatever was out there. And that's when I realized it wasn't outside the ship anymore. It was inside. The lights in the corridor behind me went out, one by one, plunging the ship into darkness. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. I could feel it now, more than ever. The presence, the thing that had been watching us, waiting for its moment. It was here, with me, inside the ship. Maybe it had been here all along, waiting for us to notice, to slip, to give in. And then I heard it. A whisper. Not words, not something I could understand, but a sound. Low, soft, and inhuman. It crawled up my spine, chilling me to the bone. I turned, but there was nothing, just the empty corridor stretching on into the dark. But the whisper didn't stop. It was getting louder, closer. It was right behind me. I ran. I don't know how long I ran for. It felt like the ship was twisting around me, the walls bending and shifting as I sprinted through the corridors. Every step felt heavier, like something was pulling me back, dragging me down. But I couldn't stop. I couldn't let it catch me. I reached the engine room and slammed the door shut behind me, my chest heaving. The lights in the room flickered on, casting long, eerie shadows over the machinery. But the whisper was gone. The presence, the thing that had been chasing me, was silent. For a moment, I let myself believe that I was safe, that I had outrun it. But then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw it. Hammond. Standing in the shadows, his face was pale, his eyes wide and empty. He didn't move, didn't speak. He just stood there, watching. And that's when I knew. There was no escape. We had never left the loop. The portal we created wasn't just bending time, it was bending us, twisting us into something we weren't meant to be. We weren't alone anymore. We were part of it now, part of the paradox, part of the presence that had been waiting for us all along. And there was no way out. I stood there, staring at Hammond in the shadows, my breath catching in my throat, his eyes, blank, soulless, bored into me, but I wasn't even sure it was really him anymore. There was something deeply wrong about the way he stood there, motionless, like a puppet waiting for someone to pull its strings. My mind raced, every instinct screaming at me to move, to run. But there was nowhere left to go. I had nowhere to run. As if reading my thoughts, Hammond, or whatever was inside of him, tilted his head just slightly. His lips parted, but what came out wasn't his voice. It was a low, guttural sound, like static mixed with faint, distorted words. They were garbled, barely human. And then, beneath the noise, I could hear it again. That whispering, louder this time, closer. I backed up slowly, my heart hammering. But my legs felt like they were made of lead. The ship was too quiet, too still. It felt like the air itself was pressing down on me, suffocating me. And that's when I realized something horrifying. There was no engine hum. The ship had gone completely silent. The engines, the life support systems, all the background noise that had been with us since the mission started, gone. The lights flickered weakly, casting eerie, unnatural shadows along the walls, but I couldn't hear the comforting hum of the machinery anymore. It was as if the ship was dead. Or maybe we were. Hammond took a step forward, slowly, unnaturally. His movements were stiff, mechanical. He wasn't looking at me anymore. His gaze had shifted to something behind me. I didn't want to turn around. I could feel it, whatever it was, standing just behind me, watching, waiting. The whispering grew louder, filling the room, but still no words, just an endless, unsettling murmur. Like thousands of voices speaking over each other, I forced myself to turn. The shadow had finally entered the room. It wasn't like anything I had ever seen, or could even comprehend. A mass of darkness, writhing and shifting. But it wasn't just black. There were shapes inside it, tangled, indistinct shapes, moving as if they were trapped in the void. It felt alive, but not in any way I could explain. It was there, but it wasn't. The air around it warped, bending light, bending reality. It was wrong on every level. And as I stared at it, something deep inside me began to unravel. It was like the very sight of this thing was tearing at my mind, fraying the edges of my sanity, like looking into the heart of something I wasn't supposed to see, something I could never understand. I stumbled back, away from both Hammond and the shadow, but the room seemed to shrink around me, the walls closing in. Hammond didn't follow. He just stood there, his face twisted into an unnatural smile. He wasn't himself anymore. The thing inside him, whatever had taken over, wasn't going to let him go. The whispering rose to a crescendo, almost deafening now, as if it were trying to tell me something, trying to force me to listen. I clamped my hands over my ears, but it didn't help. The sound was inside my head, clawing at my thoughts. "You were never meant to leave!" The voice was clear now, not garbled, not distant, but clear and terrifyingly calm. It wasn't coming from Hammond or the shadow. It was coming from everywhere. From the ship itself, from the air, from the loop we were trapped in. "You opened the door," the voice continued, "and you let us in." I backed up against the wall, my mind racing. This wasn't real. It couldn't be real, but it was. I could feel it. Feel the truth pressing in on me. We had created the portal, thinking we could control it, thinking we understood what we were doing. But we hadn't. We had torn a hole in something we couldn't fix, and now we were paying the price. The ship wasn't looping. We were. The portal had broken more than just time. It had broken us. Every time we reset, every time the loop started over, we weren't just repeating the same actions. We were losing ourselves, piece by piece, each loop erasing more of who we were. Klein had gone first, disappearing into the void. Davis followed, his presence erased like he had never existed. And now Hammond, his body still here, but his mind long gone, twisted into something unrecognizable. And I was next. I could feel it now, deep inside me. The same presence, the same wrongness that had taken them. It was already inside me, waiting, watching. The shadow shifted closer, and I could feel its cold, unnatural pull. It wasn't just an alien force. It was time itself, unraveling everything we knew, everything we were, twisting us into something else, something beyond our understanding. I sank to the floor, my back pressed against the cold metal wall. I couldn't fight it anymore. There was no way out, no escape. The loop would keep going, over and over, until there was nothing left of me, until I became part of the shadow, part of the paradox, just another ghost lost in the endless repeating cycle. The whispering finally stopped. The room was silent again, but the shadow remained. I could feel it hovering over me, waiting. And then, without warning, the lights flickered out one final time. The ship plunged into total darkness. I felt the cold brush of something against my skin, and for a brief, horrifying moment, I understood. This wasn't a loop. It was a trap. And we were never getting out.